Imagine being just 12 years old and suddenly thrust into the center of a murder investigation. That's exactly what happened to a young girl who found herself face to face with a seasoned detective, questioning her every move. The room was tense, the air thick with uncertainty. She'd been accused of something unspeakable, and the weight of it all was crushing. The detective's sharp questions grew more intense with every passing minute, yet the girl remained eerily calm. Then, with a sudden shift in the atmosphere, she spoke three simple words that stopped the detective in his tracks. His face drained of color, his confidence shattered. What could she have said that was so shocking? Was she hiding something, or did she just reveal the truth? Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything. The case had shocked the entire town. A beloved local teacher was found dead under mysterious circumstances, and all evidence seemed to point toward one person, the young girl sitting nervously in the interrogation room. Her name was Emily, a quiet, seemingly innocent child who had always kept to herself. Her family was devastated by the accusation, and everyone in town struggled to believe she could be involved in such a horrific crime. But the police had their reasons. Surveillance footage showed Emily near the scene, and a witness claimed to have seen her leaving the area on the night of the murder. It didn't help that she had been acting strangely ever since, but as the hours ticked by, the detective's frustration began to grow. There was something about Emily's demeanor that didn't add up. And then those three Detective Harris had seen a lot in his years on the force, but there was something unsettling about this case. Emily didn't act like a typical suspect. Most kids would break down, but she was calm, too calm. When he first asked her about the night of the murder, her responses were short and clipped, but nothing screamed guilt. In fact, she seemed more confused than scared. As the interrogation dragged on, Harris noticed small things that didn't add up. She kept looking at the door, almost like she was waiting for someone. At one point, she even muttered under her breath, but Harris couldn't make out the words. Her body language was telling a different story than her answers. Meanwhile, the pressure outside the interrogation room was mounting. Emily's family was frantic, insisting she couldn't have done it, but the more the police dug into her background, the more strange details surfaced. Emily's classmates described her as a loner, but one of them revealed something troubling. Emily had been obsessed with a mysterious figure she'd been talking to online. Could this person be involved in the crime? And if so, was Emily an innocent pawn, or was there something more to her story? As Harris sifted through the evidence, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut. Emily knew something, but what? And who was the person she kept looking at the door for? Words. Those three words that made him question as the hours wore on. Detective Harris felt the weight of the investigation closing in. He was certain Emily was hiding something, but the deeper he pushed, the more she climbed up. She wouldn't crack, no matter how hard he tried. Her calmness was almost eerie now. But Harris couldn't ignore the small slip-ups, tiny inconsistencies in her story that didn't line up. At one point, she mentioned something about not being able to go back, but when Harris pressed for details, she immediately climbed up again. It was as if she had said too much on accident. Then, just as he was about to ask her about the strange online figure, something changed. Emily's expression shifted, her eyes grew wide, and she suddenly froze. Harris turned to look at the door she had been staring at earlier, but no one was there. The silence in the room became deafening, and for the first time, Harris felt the real sense of danger creeping into the air. He leaned in closer, watching her carefully. "Emily," he said softly, "you're not alone in this, are you?" Her eyes darted to the door again, and without warning, she spoke the three words that had been haunting him all day. "He's coming soon." Harris's heart skipped a beat. Who was she talking about? And why did it feel like those words were more of a warning than a statement? The tension in the room escalated as he looked at Emily, now more determined than ever to uncover the truth. But time was running out. With each passing second, the stakes grew higher, and the walls of the interrogation room seemed to close in tighter. And just as Harris opened his mouth to ask another question, the lights flickered. The room felt colder, and a loud bang echoed from somewhere down the hall. It was clear. Whatever was happening, they were running out of time, everything. What could they mean? The bang echoed through the building again, louder this time, and the lights flickered once more. Harris's breath caught in his throat, a sense of unease rising from deep within him. He tried to focus, his mind racing. What was happening? He could feel a shift in the air, the tension mounting like a storm about to break. Then, as if on cue, the door to the interrogation room suddenly slammed open. Harris leaped to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. But it wasn't another officer standing there. It was a man, tall and shadowed, his face obscured by a hoodie. Harris' instincts flared. He instinctively reached for his gun, but something about the man's presence stopped him. The man's voice was low, almost a whisper, but it sent a chill down Harris' spine. "Get away from her," the man said, his eyes locked onto Emily. Emily's face softened for the first time in hours. She looked up at the stranger, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. It was clear they knew each other, but Harris couldn't understand how or why. This wasn't just a witness. This wasn't even someone connected to the crime. This was someone who clearly had control over the situation. The detective's mind raced. How could this man have come in so easily? Who was he? And how did he know Emily? Before Harris could speak, the man stepped forward, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said to the detective, his tone ominous. "This isn't her fault." Emily didn't speak. She only stared at the man, her expression unreadable. Harris could feel his pulse quicken. There was no telling how this was going to play out, but one thing was certain: things were about to get much more dangerous. The man slowly turned toward Harris. "The truth is buried deep, and you're too far gone to see it, but she's not who you think she is." Those words hung in the air, thick with mystery. Harris' mind was racing, piecing together the scattered fragments of the case. Who was this man? What was his connection to Emily? And why did it feel like they were in the middle of something far bigger than a simple murder investigation? The walls of the interrogation room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. Harris was caught in a tangled web of lies, secrets, and a dangerous force he couldn't yet understand. The clock was ticking, and the truth was slipping further out of reach with every passing second. The room was heavy with silence as Harris stood frozen, trying to process the man's cryptic words. The stranger's presence was like a shadow that cast over everything, and Emily seemed almost relieved. Harris was running out of options. Everything had been leading to this moment, and now the pieces were starting to fit, but in a way that terrified him. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. "Who are you?" Harris demanded, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. The man didn't flinch. He stood there, calm and composed, but he knew something Harris didn't. "Her protector," he said simply, as if that explained everything. Emily finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't do it. I didn't kill her." The words hit Harris like a punch. He stared at Emily, seeing the truth in her eyes, but it made no sense. The evidence was clear. Her fingerprints were all over the scene, her presence on the surveillance footage undeniable. Yet, the more he looked at her, the more he realized that something was horribly wrong. The man moved toward the table, speaking with an eerie confidence. "The teacher you're talking about, detective, she wasn't the victim. She was the perpetrator." Harris's mind reeled. "What? You're telling me?" The man nodded. "She was using Emily, manipulating her into doing things she didn't even understand. But when Emily started pushing back, things went too far. The teacher got desperate, and in the end, she paid the price." The weight of the revelation hit Harris like a freight train. The true killer wasn't Emily. She was just a victim, a pawn in someone else's twisted game. The teacher had been the real mastermind, a predator hiding behind the guise of innocence, controlling and twisting Emily's mind for her own dark purposes. But then, just as Harris thought he was beginning to grasp the truth, Emily's expression shifted again. this time with a coldness that sent a shiver down his spine. She looked directly at the detective, her eyes no longer filled with fear, but something much darker.